It's often difficult to follow wonderful introductions like that, but many times I have to follow these videos of my uncle giving some inspirational speech, and then they say, and now here's Congressman Kennedy, and I have to follow that. So I'm used to following very difficult acts to follow. And I spent my whole life trying to follow various family members in very distinguished careers in public life, and I thought to myself, you know, what in the world could I do that contributes to any of this, that could even hold a candle to a lot of what my family has done before me. When I grew up, I thought to myself, civil rights fight, you know, my uncle was the first to speak on the issue of civil rights, my Uncle Bobby, my Uncle Jack, and then my dad's worked on the ADA and trying to bring people with disabilities into the fold under the civil rights laws of our country. And I couldn't have imagined at that time that, in a sense, this was an extension of that historic march for progress that I was so proud to be part of this family that had been part of that great march for progress and opening up opportunities for more and more Americans who had been marginalized in our society, either because of the color of their skin, their gender, or because of a physical disability. And I couldn't have imagined that I would have been able to play a small part in this by including in that long march of progress, opening up the American dream to millions of Americans who are marginalized because their illness is in the brain and we can't see it, and so therefore it's stigmatized because of the prejudice and misunderstanding that takes place with these illnesses. Obviously, for all of you who care about these illnesses, because you're focusing your whole lives on uncovering the mysteries of the brain, you know, implementation of parity, full implementation of parity is going to go a long way to expanding this field, because ultimately if people start demanding their rights for this coverage, then it's going to change the way people view this marketplace, so to speak, because they'll see that, well, this is an enormous marketplace, because as we all know, the biggest fight we have now is stigma still. 2/3 of those who do have the access to good insurance don't ever utilize it because they're so ashamed of their illness that they're not going to want to avail themselves of the coverage. So I felt after we did the parity, though, what's going to help us change attitudes as much as anything else? And I saw two things politically. One, the fact that our veterans are now on the front lines of this illness. And principally because of their service to our country, they're suffering higher burden of illness in all neurological disorders. And I don't necessarily like to call psychiatric because I call it neurological, because it's just psychiatric's a more pejorative word, frankly, as is mental health, as is behavioral, for something that's really physical and should be defined as simply health. But take that as it is, the whole barrier to veterans getting health care is both, you know, real, fragmented, and it's also attitudinal, because veterans don't want to avail themselves of this service that would then reveal them to be less than, because they can't pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They can't get with it. They're not strong enough. Well, that's why so many are resorting to suicide. And in June of this year, the Department of Defense actually recorded more active duty soldiers taking their own life than were killed in action. And I know there are other months in the year that that's also the case. The fact that any month in the year actually records more of our American heroes taking their own lives than they're being taken in battle should be a wake-up call to all of us that our number one enemy, if you will, is not Al-Qaeda or Taliban. It's suicide. And if it is as such, then we need to have really put together the full might of military power, if you will, to tackle this just as we would any military objective. Now, the country is feeling patriotic right now because of the great sacrifice and amazing talent of our special forces. Well, this other amazing part of my family legacy is my uncle was the first to award the wearing of the Green Beret, and they named the school, the Fort Bragg, the Special Warfare School, that trains the SEALs, in addition to out in Coronado in Fort Bragg, the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare School. So when I went down there for the rededication, I asked General Shelton at the time, I said, General, tell me about, do you guys have mental health? Because they all knew that was my kind of calling card. They had to answer whatever questions I had about mental health. They said, Congressman, we knew you were probably going to ask that question. We're happy to answer it for you. Green Berets get more mental health than any other branch of the service. And I said, get out of here. These guys jump out of planes, they swim underwater for 2 miles without breathing, they jump out and they take out their target from 5 miles away without thinking. They speak 5 languages and they're home by dinner to tuck their kids in. I mean, come on, these guys don't need mental health. And they said, no, Congressman, we don't look at mental health as a safety net. We look at mental health as a force multiplier. And I'm like, what's that again? Force multiplier. We believe in getting the best of the best, and to keep them the best of the best, we give them mental health. Because what makes a special operations soldier is not their brawn, it's their brains. And I'm like, give that to me one more. He said, no, Congressman, we are so invested in these soldiers that in order for them to be the best of the best, we don't want one other thing, detracting from their ability to reach their full potential. So we provide them mental health because it allows them to accentuate their potential. And I said, wouldn't that be fantastic if the rest of America saw mental health on a spectrum like the top branches of our military? That mental health, as opposed to being something that closes our deficits, actually also enhances our potential as individuals. And it made me ultimately recall what ultimately was the reason we passed parity. And that is because parity was already implemented by Fortune 100 companies in this country, who realized in order for them to have the best employees, they had to offer the best in care for mental health, because that was so essential to keeping and retaining the best people. I had this harebrained idea when I was sitting at a board meeting, sitting on the board of the John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center. They said, well, next year we're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy. And of course, I perked up and said, Jesus, 50th anniversary. I know that I never made it in politics. I got elected, as Husseini said, when I was 21. Then I got elected to Congress when I was 27. And then I was elected to leadership in the Congress at 30. And I know it's all because of my good looks and personality. That's what it is. It had nothing to do with my last name being Kennedy whatsoever. So I said, I know there's something powerful about this Kennedy thing. We better seize this anniversary, try to advance my issue, because that's how singular I am about this. So I keep hearing them say, the brain is the last medical frontier. And I said, well, I know I've heard all these speeches about him being the new frontier, John F. Kennedy, the new frontier. That was his big thing. So I said, and I know he talked about going to space. How about we try to brand that as going to inner space, not outer space? And so I talked to my cousin Caroline. She said, you know what? You can take the keys to the library on May 25th, and if you want to put it with a bunch of neuroscientists and you can convince everyone that our moonshot for our generation is a moonshot to the mind, go to it. So, I talked to this guy named Husseini, and he said, I think we can pull that together. And we went to the Society for Neuroscience, and I said to all of the group, I said, I see a room full of astronauts. I said, you're all going to plant the flag that's going to create the greatest discoveries for our generation in terms of medical breakthroughs. And just as Neil Armstrong said, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, imagine a paralyzed veteran being able to step out of their wheelchair for the first time after their injury, because we repaired the spinal cord. Imagine a veteran of PTSD being able to take that first step out of their household, or a first step into a new job, because we repaired the understandings of TBI and PTSD. Imagine that as the first step. I think, for me, that's as much of an inspiration as thinking about that step on the moon. Because for those people who could be impacted by discoveries of the brain, their step out of the house, their step into a new life is going to be much more inspirational. In my mind, I mean, not to detract from the moonshot, but as anything that the moonshot accomplished. And I know that was an apex of scientific achievement for our nation, and one that the country feels a great deal of pride about. I think if we can rebrand our moonshot to talk about what is the greatest scientific challenge for our day, and that is to unlock the mysteries of the mind, then we will have rebranded and used that great anniversary of the moonshot to redirect us and inspire us, and have that great speech that he gave, become an inspiration for today's generation. And, we had great acceptance of that. And we've managed to, thanks to a lot of what you all have helped us with, put all the best neuroscientists in the nation together on the anniversary of President Kennedy's moonshot. We had the vice president coming. The president's going to be out of the country, but he knows about it. And we're hoping to almost set the table for the administration to say, today's moonshot is a moonshot to the mind. Now, whether we get the administration to actually say that or not, we've got them at the table. And what we need to do now is continue to push this. And what will be the Sputnik for this moonshot, just as it took us having to compete with the Russians in order to beat them into space, what's national security? Obviously, our highway system was built under Eisenhower for national security reasons, because, of course, it couldn't be justified because it was good to build a national highway system. We had to do it because we had to figure out how we're going to move everyone around the country in case of the Cold War. What allowed us to do nuclear age was the Manhattan Project. And that's what allowed us to get all the best scientists to do whatever it took for us to be the first to produce the nuclear bomb. What allowed us to do the moonshot is national security. Okay? It'd be great if people with Alzheimer's were a national security issue, or kids with autism, or families with schizophrenia or Parkinson's. But unfortunately, that doesn't move the needle in Washington, D.C. But if it's for our nation's heroes, our veterans, our soldiers, and if we identify that as our national security objective, we change the game, so to speak, in this issue of brain science, away from just being a patient issue to being a national security issue. And I had this friend of mine from the Rhode Island Guard. He said he was a medic in Iraq, 2 tours right on the front line, and he showed me these pictures of his convoy blown up by an IED or hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. He said, "Congressman, if one of my guys gets hit and killed at that event, that's a tragedy." He said, "But what's equally a tragedy is one of these guys who get hit but survive, but 5 years later, they come down with a dreaded neurological disorder because of a TBI, or they end up taking their own life because of PTSD." He said, "I don't differentiate that between someone killed that day, because it's still a win for the terrorist." I said, "You gotta be kidding me." He said, "You mean even after the war is over, the war's still continuing with it?" He said, "Yes, and you know what? We don't look at it as a battle-related casualty when they take their lives 5 years later. But in my mind, the terrorist doesn't care when they get us, so long as they get us." I said, that's a pretty new way of thinking. He said, "Yes, so even if they kill themselves 5 years, that's a win for the terrorists because they got one of us." And I said, if we thought about our soldiers like that, and we were counting all of these suicides every day in America, not only in our Guard and Reserve, but those who are veterans, and if we ever counted the number of soldiers who are now getting put in prison today because of their untreated invisible wounds of war. And by the way, in Rhode Island, it's 15% or more every day of incoming prisoners are Iraq and Afghan war veterans. And right now, we aren't as a nation keeping track of how many soldiers we're locking up. But because Rhode Island's the second highest deployed Guard and Reserve unit in the nation, including all 50 states and 4 territories, we're having high rates of this. And the people who are locking them up are their fellow Guard and Reservists, because all the police departments in the state are also Guard and Reserve units. So they're locking up their friends, and they don't like it. We have a moment in time now to change the attitudes towards our correction system, which principally is our biggest mental health system, and saying, listen, let's try to intervene early and keep these soldiers from being locked up, because that's one hell of a way to welcome home our American heroes, is to say, welcome home, here are the keys to the jail, we're locking you up, because we're not treating your invisible wounds of war, because we don't think those are real wounds. So my feeling is, if we understand the brain better, if we bring these transparencies to understanding that these are physiological wounds. So even if you're not hit by an IED, if your cortisol has been pumping through your brain because you're worried about driving down a road where you do get hit with an IED, that changes the neurophysiology of your brain. And hence, you are injured, if you will, because if you did an fMRI before and fMRI afterwards, you'd see a change in the brain structure, whether that's actually from a traumatic injury or because of too prolonged exposure to the fight or flight response. That is physical. It's not psychological. It's physical. And if you all can help us bring that transparency to the American public, where they understand that this is a real... If the soldiers begin to believe this is real, then the American public will begin to believe it's real. And what we do for the soldiers will be enough for us to make it for everybody else. So once again, our soldiers are going to be our freedom fighters. Because I say, not only did they kick down the doors overseas, but when they come home, if we get behind them, they're going to kick down the doors of discovery in terms of brain science. Because we need to save them from being prisoners of their war injuries. And if neuroscience of all kinds sheds the light of day for these soldiers to escape the dungeons of their disability, of depression and addiction, and allows them to find their way out into the real world again, so that when they come home, they're not only coming home in body, but they're coming home in mind too. What a victory that will be for the people that we owe it to the most, our American heroes. And if we can do it for them, they're going to do it for everyone else. Because what allows us to get the money to save our soldiers, their win is going to be a win that accrues to everyone's advantage, ultimately. Because in order to find their escape hatch, they're going to be the ones who find the escape hatch that's going to allow all Americans to escape their dreaded neurological disorders too, whether that's a child with autism or a parent with Alzheimer's. We feel that trying to put the politics of neuroscience together is going to be key to finding the funding and the initiative and the urgency to get this done. Because what we're missing in this field is not a lack of enough people affected by neurological disorders. That's not the problem. It's not a lack of money, because the money's out there, believe me, when you look at what some of these other groups raise, who have a fraction of the burden of illness of what these disorders represent. The money's there. Is the politicians? They'll be on board once they see the money and the people. The key now is putting these pieces together and connecting the dots. And if we put it together in a way that, like I said to this group in neuroscience, I said, we need to have neuroscience with some political science. We need some political science to instruct how we explain neuroscience, so it's not as complex for people, but it's very simple. And that is, there's only one brain we're talking about. And understanding the fundamentals of that brain are going to unlock the doors for everything from Alzheimer's to autism to addiction to schizophrenia to depression. And instead of us thinking about this as a million different neurological disorders, it's combined by one brain. So let's get to the brain, and we'll open up the door for everybody else in the process. One mind. Let's be of one mind on research. I've seen advocacy, and I can't believe what I am seeing here, and that is the silence is deafening out there. Because this is so daunting. and you add stigma to it, and it just makes everybody run the other way. All of your competitors are running the other way. What makes you unique is that you're running towards the problem. It's a huge decision that you all have made as a company. To say, no, we're not going to ignore the biggest burden of illness. Even as challenging as it is, we're going to try to tackle it. That's enormous. I just wish we had that philosophy, occupy more people's thinking than just J&J. But the good news for you is, when you put yourself out there, you make your mark in this field, anything to do with neuroscience in the future is going to have to do with J&J. Because you're going to have your imprint. You're going to have your moniker as being in this field. So as a politician, all I knew is that once I got the branding as being a guy who was interested in mental health, whenever someone who had a mental health bill, whether it had to do with autism or Alzheimer's or taking care of our soldiers or anyone or caregivers, they had to come to me, because if they were going to get the bill to be taken seriously, someone would ask, well, do you have Kennedy on it? I unwittingly, at the end of my career, couldn't believe that I had put myself in every single room in the Congress that had a discussion on neuroscience to it. Now, if J&J has the branding of being in neuroscience, believe me, anything that comes down the road that has to do with neuroscience or mental health treatment, people say, well, what does J&J think? Because they got the best. So I think while you're taking on a challenging field, it's going to pay huge dividends. And I'll close with this. The 1-year anniversary of my dad's passing, I called a fellow named Alan Friedman. He was the neurosurgeon who did the surgery on my dad, where they gave him less than 2 months to live. That neurosurgeon gave us an extra year together. It was the most important year of my life with my father. And he was in great shape. I could never pay enough money for that year that I was given with my dad. That's as personal as it gets. So science to me is personal because it's the key to taking care of the people I love. And that's what you're doing. And that's why I said to him, I need to put an American flag on your scrubs, because those scrubs represent the person that's in the front line, just like those Navy SEALs. Just like those Navy SEALs. You're our first responder. You're going to save our family members. And most importantly, you're going to save our soldiers who are on the front lines of these diseases that are affected because of their brain injuries. So you got to keep after it, because what you're doing is not only, I think, morally the right thing, but it's the right thing for our country and for those people who we should all care about the most. And those are the people that were willing to put their lives on the line to keep us safe. And they deserve nothing but the best. Thank you very much.